Archangel Michael says the night carried a kind of silence that pressed against the walls like it wanted to speak first, and before I ever opened my mouth, the truth I had been hiding felt heavier than the room itself. The air didn't simply settle around me, it wrapped itself like a cold warning, as if every light in the world had dimmed to witness what was about to unfold. This moment wasn't meant to be gentle because gentle moments never carry the weight of reality the way this one does. I felt the shadows gather in the corners, listening, steady, unmoving, knowing that once the words left my chest, nothing would remain the same ever again. The truth had been pacing behind my ribs, restless, uncontained, and I could no longer stop it from stepping into the open. Even the floor beneath me seemed to tense, as though the world itself braced for impact. Every breath before the confession tasted like metal, sharp and unforgiving, and the silence around me grew thick enough to split. It wasn't fear that made my heart beat like that, it was the knowledge that once I spoke, something inside both of us would break, not by aggression, but by inevitability. The moment clung to me like a final warning before the storm begins. I stood there holding the kind of truth that drags the soul through its edges, the kind that once spoken cannot be unspoken. Time moved differently around me, slow and deliberate, as though pushing me forward toward a reality I never asked for. So I finally breathed, and let the words rise. Type Amen to get blessing 333. I am going to break your heart by sharing this news, and there is no way to soften what I am about to say because softness would turn into dishonesty. I have been in the hospital recently, and the truth is not the kind that bends or gives room for denial. I was diagnosed with something that changed the shape of my days, the rhythm of my nights, and the direction of everything I thought my life would be. I didn't want anyone to carry this weight with me, and for a while, I tried to hold it alone like a secret that bites back every time you touch it. The doctors spoke in voices that felt distant, like they were standing behind glass, and I understood only fragments while the rest dissolved into the static of disbelief. I walked out with a piece of paper that marked a new chapter one never agreed to enter. The hallways felt longer that day, stretching into a future I wasn't ready to face, and the lights above flickered like they understood what I carried. I didn't cry, not then, because the body sometimes protects itself by freezing, and mine chose stillness over collapse. The truth only settled when I sat alone in my room, hearing nothing but the echo of what I had just been told. My hands shook when I tried to write about it, tried to put the story into words before it devoured me from the inside. There are moments life gives you without warning, and this one carved itself into my memory with the precision of a blade. I knew then that I couldn't hide forever. Type Amen to receive blessings 333. The first night after the diagnosis felt like walking along the edge of a cliff with no railing to catch me if I slipped. I listened to the hum of the machines around me and realized how fragile the rhythm of a heartbeat truly is when someone else is monitoring it. Even the ceiling seemed too high, as if the room had grown larger to swallow the reality pressing against my chest. Archangel Michael says the body can endure more than the soul expects, yet the spirit rises whenever the truth is too heavy to carry alone. That night, a presence settled near me, calm and unwavering, reminding me that even in the darkest moments, the soul refuses to surrender its light. I held on to that presence like a thin thread that kept me from falling into the abyss inside my mind. I wasn't afraid of the illness itself, I was afraid of the silence it cast over the future I imagined. I was afraid of the words I would eventually have to say, the confessions that carried more weight than any diagnosis. I was afraid of the way your eyes would change when you heard the truth. The world outside continued as if nothing had shifted, but inside me, everything had been rearranged by force. I carried a new kind of awareness, a sense of time that felt sharper, more defined, and somehow more precious than ever before. The night became both my shelter and my reminder of everything I stood to lose. Type Amen to welcome blessing 333. I waited days before I gathered the courage to say it aloud, rehearsing the words until they felt like pieces of a story that didn't belong to me. I practiced breathing through the fear, letting each inhale anchor me while each exhale carried away pieces of denial. But no matter how much I prepared, the truth still felt heavier than I could bear. When I woke in the hospital bed, sunlight spilled across my hands like a fragile promise, warm but faint. It didn't erase anything, but it reminded me that light still finds a way in, even when the walls close in from all sides. The morning noise of footsteps, whispered conversations, and soft reminders kept me tethered to the world. I watched people come and go, each carrying their own silent stories, and it made me realize how many battles remain unseen beneath steady faces. No one looked me in the eyes long enough to notice what was behind mine. And maybe that was a blessing, because it gave me time to process before anyone asked for explanations I wasn't ready to give. I wrote letters I never sent, long paragraphs that spilled from my hands like they were searching for a cure that didn't exist. I wrote about my fear, my strength, my confusion, and the strange calm that settled in moments I least expected. The pages became my witnesses before I ever became brave enough to face the world again. Type Amen to claim blessing 333. Nights were the hardest, because the quiet magnifies everything you try to silence inside yourself. I could feel the weight of the diagnosis sitting beside me, a constant reminder of how quickly life can shift without warning. But even then, I didn't want pity or sorrow, I wanted understanding. I walked along the hospital corridor slowly, letting my feet touch the cold floor one step at a time. Each step felt like a conversation with fate itself, testing my strength, demanding my presence, asking me to stand firm even though my world had cracked open. I moved like someone learning to trust their own body again. When I finally reached the window at the end of the hall, the city lights flickered beneath the night sky like 1,000 tiny heartbeats. I pressed my hand against the glass and let the outside world remind me that life continues, no matter how fractured I feel. That night, something inside me settled, not with acceptance, but with determination. Archangel Michael says courage is not loud, it is the soft, steady flame that refuses to go out, even when the wind rises against it. His presence felt near, like a shield forming around my trembling resolve. I held on to that shield, not because I wanted protection, but because I needed strength. Type Amen to receive divine blessing 333. The next morning arrived with a sense of clarity that surprised me. I knew I had to tell you, no matter how much the words tore through me. The truth wasn't meant to be hidden in shadows forever. I prepared myself slowly, moving with deliberate calm as I folded my belongings, gathered the papers I had avoided reading twice, and chose the moment to breathe before everything changed. The world outside the hospital seemed louder than usual, as though every sound demanded my attention. Cars, footsteps, voices, all blending into a reminder that life continues even when mine had paused. When I finally walked outside, the air felt fresh but heavy, like it carried the weight of unsaid confessions in its currents. I stood near the entrance for a long moment, letting the sky settle into my vision. The sunlight felt different now, softer, as though it understood my story. I made my way home with slow, steady steps, and every familiar thing seemed strangely distant, as though my house remembered an older version of me who didn't carry this truth. I sat down in the quiet and felt the room shift around my heartbeat. The time had come. Type Amen to accept blessing 333. The words formed slowly in my chest, heavy and unsteady, but ready. I knew you deserved honesty, not silence. And withholding the truth any longer felt like betraying the bond we once believed would last through anything. The confession wasn't meant to hurt you, but it carried pain anyway, because truth doesn't choose kindness when reality demands clarity. I rehearsed the lines once more, breathing through every trembling pulse. I knew the moment I opened my mouth, the world between us would transform into something fragile and new. So here it is. I have been in the hospital recently, and I was diagnosed with something that will shape my coming days with uncertainty. I am not disappearing, but I am walking through a chapter that demands more strength than I knew I had. And I can no longer hide this from you. I speak not to bring sorrow but to share the weight of what I carry. I speak because silence has become a burden too heavy to bear alone. And in giving you the truth, I am giving you a piece of my heart. Type Amen to open blessing 333. The words hung in the air long after I spoke them, as if the room itself needed time to absorb the meaning before it allowed anything else to exist. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was thick and trembling, shaped by everything I had been holding inside for far too long. I felt the weight lift from my chest, even though it settled heavily into the space between us. The truth carried a strange stillness with it, a kind that wrapped around my bones and filled the cracks where denial used to hide. My breath moved differently now, steadier, as though the act of speaking had stitched me back into my own body again. Even the quiet seemed to exhale with me. Admitting the reality didn't erase the fear, but it did shift something deep within me that had remained frozen since the diagnosis. The world didn't collapse, though it did tilt, reshaping everything I thought I could predict about tomorrow. There was no turning back now, and strangely, I didn't want to. My hands were still shaking, not from regret, but from the release that comes when a burden finally leaves the shadows. I felt raw, exposed, but honest in a way I hadn't been in weeks. Truth has its own gravity, and mine had finally found the ground. Type Amen to get blessing 333. The room seemed smaller after the confession, the walls pulling in closer like they wanted to listen more carefully to what might come next. My heartbeat slowed, settling into a rhythm that felt fragile yet determined. I hadn't expected the sense of strange peace that followed the storm of speaking. Even though pain lingered behind my ribs, there was also a relieved kind of quiet rising inside me, steady and almost comforting. I leaned back slightly, letting the world readjust around the words that were no longer locked inside my chest. It felt like surrender, but not the kind that signals defeat, more like surrendering to truth after fighting it far too long. The memories of the hospital flashed through me again, not as a threat, but as a reminder of the path I had been walking alone until now. The cold hallway floors, the distant beeping of machines, the faces of nurses moving with silent urgency. All of it stitched itself into the moment, becoming part of the reason I needed to speak. I remembered the day they handed me the diagnosis, the way the paper felt too light for something that carried so much heaviness. The doctor's voice echoed in my mind again, not cruel, just factual, steady, unshaken by the reality that had splintered mine. That memory tightened around my chest, but I no longer flinched from it. Type Amen to receive blessing 333. I sat with the confession for a long moment, allowing every emotion to settle in its rightful place. Fear didn't disappear, but it softened, no longer clawing at the edges of my mind like it once did. Instead, a strange kind of courage began to rise. Every part of my body felt the shift, my shoulders relaxing, my breath deepening, my pulse losing its frantic edge. The moment was raw, unfiltered, and honest, exactly what it needed to be. Reality was no longer a distant echo. It was here, sitting beside me, patient and unrelenting. I didn't feel alone in it anymore, even though the next steps were still uncertain. Something about speaking aloud created space inside me, a space where strength could grow. And within that space, I felt the faintest spark of resilience. Archangel Michael says the soul becomes strongest when truth becomes its foundation, even if the truth trembles in the beginning. His presence felt like a steady hand on my back, grounding me with silent reassurance. The weight didn't disappear, but it became bearable in a new way. Type Amen to welcome blessing 333. The hours that followed unfolded slowly, each minute stretching into something meaningful. I thought about the countless nights spent overthinking, the quiet battles fought inside the darkest corners of my mind. None of them compared to the relief of letting the truth finally breathe. My body remembered every step I took through the hospital corridors, each one refining my strength without me even realizing it. The dim lights, the disinfectant scent, the soft murmurs of passing nurses, all of it shaped the resilience I carried now. The quiet hum of those nights echoed softly inside me. Even the loneliness of those days felt different now, transformed by the act of sharing what once felt unbearable. The isolation I had wrapped myself in started to loosen, thread by thread. For the first time since the diagnosis, I felt connected again. The truth had demanded courage, and somehow, courage had answered. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the subtle shift of breath and the steady beating of my heart. I had faced something that once felt impossible. Type Amen to accept blessing 333. I rose slowly from where I had been sitting, my body adjusting to the weight of everything I had spoken. The floor beneath my feet felt more solid, more real, more firmly connected to the path I knew I had to walk. My steps were steady, guided not just by necessity but by clarity. I moved to the window and looked out at the world with new eyes, noticing details that had slipped past me during the weeks of quiet panic. The sky carried soft streaks of color, stretched across the horizon like they had been waiting for me to finally notice them. Even the air felt different, lighter, gentler. I pressed my hand against the glass, feeling the coolness beneath my skin, grounding me in the present moment. The reflection staring back was tired, but not defeated. There was a new steadiness in my gaze, something earned through fire and truth. The world outside continued to move, but for once, I felt like I wasn't trailing behind it. Instead, I felt aligned with it, standing in a moment of reclaimed control. And that shift mattered more than I could express. Type Amen to claim blessing 333. The confession created a ripple inside me, opening parts of myself I had kept closed for too long. I felt memories rising, struggles, hopes, moments of regret, moments of strength, each one adding depth to the reality I now carried. None of it felt wasted, every moment had led to this one. I thought back to the night I first arrived at the hospital, disoriented and overwhelmed, trying to convince myself that the situation couldn't be as serious as it felt. The cold air, the rushed footsteps, the walls that seemed too white, too bright, they all carved themselves into my memory. That night had changed everything without asking permission. The unfamiliar medical terms, the sudden tests, the silent tension in the room when the doctor walked in, every detail pulsed through me like a distant echo. The truth had been heavy then, almost unbearable. But now, after speaking it aloud, it no longer crushed me in the same way. I realized healing doesn't begin with medicine alone. Sometimes, it begins the moment honesty replaces the fear of being seen. And standing in that awareness, I felt something in me quietly shift toward acceptance. Type Amen to open blessing 333. The truth settled into the room with a quiet weight, shaping the atmosphere into something almost sacred. I felt the air shift around me, heavier yet clearer, as though the walls themselves had finally understood what I had been carrying alone. Even my breath moved differently, slower, more deliberate, grounded by honesty. The emotional fog that had clung to me for weeks began to lift, revealing the raw but steady path ahead. It wasn't easy to stand inside this new reality, but standing felt possible for the first time. My body remembered the tremors of fear, yet it also began to remember the strength rising beneath them. Every heartbeat echoed with a reminder that I was still here, still breathing, still fighting. The weight of the diagnosis didn't vanish, but it shifted, transforming into something I could acknowledge without flinching. In that shift, a fragile but real power returned to me. I closed my eyes and allowed a moment of stillness to settle over my shoulders like a soft cloak. It wasn't comfort, not fully, but it was peace in its earliest form, delicate and sincere. And I held onto it with both hands. Type Amen to get blessing 333. The memories of the hospital followed me like shadows with edges softened by distance. I remembered the cold touch of the medical equipment, the quiet hum of machines that monitored every fragile rhythm of my pulse. I remembered the nurses who moved with efficiency, their steps quick but quiet, their eyes filled with unspoken understanding. Those days had carved themselves into me with precision, shaping the version of myself who now stood stronger than before. I could still feel the sterile air against my skin, the unmistakable scent of disinfectant lingering in the halls. Even now, the memory carried weight, but it no longer felt suffocating. The papers I had tucked away at home still waited for me, filled with terms that once sent waves of fear rushing through my spine. But now, they felt like part of my journey instead of a threat looming over me. Reading them would still hurt, but it wouldn't break me. I had crossed the threshold between fear and acceptance, and though the road ahead remained uncertain, I no longer walked it hiding from the truth. The confession had opened a door inside me that could never close again. And stepping through it gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. Type Amen to receive blessing 333. I walked across the room with slow, measured steps, letting the new sense of clarity settle into my bones. The floor felt steady beneath me, as if each step reaffirmed that I had not been defeated by the news, only transformed by it. Even my shadow seemed to move with a calmer rhythm. I reached for the papers I had avoided reading twice, feeling their familiar weight between my fingers. The print seemed less intimidating now, each word no longer a threat but a map I needed to understand. The fear didn't spike anymore. Instead, a quiet resolve rose in its place. I placed the papers down gently and sat before them with a steady breath. The sunlight filtering through the window made the edges of the pages glow softly, giving them a gentleness they never had inside the hospital. Time moved slowly, stretching into a space where healing could begin. I wasn't ready to read everything again just yet, but for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to run away from it. The truth was no longer something chasing me, it was something I had finally turned to face. And that made all the difference. Archangel Michael says strength grows in the spaces where truth is no longer resisted, but embraced with steady acceptance. His presence felt near, calm and unwavering, like a silent guardian at the edge of my awareness. It gave me the steadiness I needed to take the next step. Type Amen to welcome blessing 333. The stillness returned, richer and more grounded than before, wrapping around me with a sense of quiet protection. I leaned back into my seat and let the world settle around me, taking shape in gentle waves. My heartbeat found a rhythm that felt more aligned with hope than fear. Night approached slowly, painting the room in shades of blue and soft dimness. The changing light reflected the shifts inside me, transforming my surroundings into a space that felt both safe and deeply reflective. The shadows lengthened, but they no longer carried the heaviness they once did. I watched the room fade into softer tones, each color reminding me that even darkness carries its own form of beauty. The corners that once felt filled with dread now simply held silence. A quiet, steady silence that allowed me to breathe without trembling. My body felt different now, still tired, still human, but grounded in truth. The weight had not vanished, but it had settled into a place where I could hold it without breaking. And that fragile strength filled me with calm determination. Type Amen to accept blessing 333. I rose again, drawn toward the window as the last light of day slipped beneath the horizon. The sky held streaks of deep color, each one stretching out like a reminder that endings often carry quiet beginnings within them. The world outside looked softer, calmer, shaped by twilight. I placed my hand against the glass, feeling the coolness sink into my palm. The reflection staring back carried exhaustion, yes, but also a spark of resilience that had been absent days before. My eyes no longer held the panic that once lived there. Breathing in the cool, fading light, I allowed a wave of understanding to wash over me. Life had changed in ways I couldn't control, but the part of me that refused to surrender had begun to rise. And I knew I would continue rising, one breath at a time. The night settled fully then, deep and quiet, wrapping everything in stillness. I stood there for a long time, letting the darkness gently surround me. In that darkness, I found a familiar comfort, an invitation to rest. Type Amen to claim blessing 333. The weight of the day began to ease, leaving behind a calm that lingered in the air like a whispered promise. I walked slowly back to my chair, each step deliberate, each breath a reminder of my strength. The room felt different now, more peaceful, more aligned with the truth I carried. Sitting again, I let my hands rest gently in my lap, feeling the quiet pulse of life moving through me.